Hi, and welcome to a video presentation on bar graphs. Here's what you'll learn: how to interpret data in bar graphs and how to make bar graphs. First of all, what is a bar graph? Well, it's a graph that uses vertical or horizontal bars to display data. Let's interpret a bar graph. This bar graph shows the elevations of the highest points in a few states. Use the graph to answer the questions that follow. Well, the first thing we should do is take a look at the graph overall so we understand what's being displayed. Well, there's a title at the top, which your graph should always have. On the left-hand side is a label for the vertical axis. It tells us it's the elevation in thousands of feet. And it starts at 0 and goes all the way up to 22,000 feet in height by increments of 2,000. Down along the bottom we have the list of the highest peaks in 6 different states, all the way from Granite Peak, Montana, all the way to Mount Rogers, Virginia. Okay, now we're ready to answer some questions about the graph since we know what the graph is telling us. And here's the first question. Of the states shown, which has the highest elevation? Well, since the elevations increase along the vertical axis, all we're doing is looking for the highest bar. And that's the one we're pointing at here, and that's Mount McKinley, Alaska. About how much higher is Granite Peak than Guadalupe Peak? Well, we need to find the bars for both of those peaks. So let's find Granite Peak first, and then find Guadalupe Peak. And to find out how much higher one is than the other, we're just looking for the difference between them. So always take the largest number. In this case, it would be Granite Peak, and is a little bit above 12,000, so we'll call it 12,500 feet. And we'll subtract the height of Guadalupe Peak, which looks to be a little bit above 8,000, so we'll call that 8,500 feet. And Granite Peak is about 4,000 feet higher than Guadalupe Peak. Here's our third question. About how much higher is Mount Whitney than Mount Marcy? Well, once again, we need to find those bars. Mount Whitney is the one shown here. Mount Marcy is the other one shown here. And to find how much higher one is than the other, we're looking for the difference. We take the highest peak, which is Mount Whitney. It's a little bit above 14,000, so we'll call it 14,500 feet. Subtract the smallest height. It looks like Mount Marcy is almost to 6,000, but not quite, so we'll call that 5,500 feet. And the difference between the two then is 9,000 feet. Okay, now that we've learned how to interpret a bar graph, let's make one of our own. The data below shows the number of times the Super Bowl has been broadcast on 4 different television networks through the year 2011. Let's make a bar graph of the data. Well, the first thing you should always do is take a look at the information you have to graph and make sure you understand it. The very first column shows the network that has broadcast the Super Bowl, and the second column shows how many times that network has televised the Super Bowl. The first column of data are normally plotted along the horizontal axis or the x-axis, and the second column of data are normally plotted along the vertical axis or the y-axis. Since we know that, let's go ahead and label our graph by adding the network names along the bottom of the graph. Once we do that, we need to add a title for that axis. Those are all TV networks, so we'll just label it as TV networks. Next thing we need to do is figure out a scale for the vertical axis. We always start at 0, so we're going to add that at the bottom. Next, we need to see how many vertical lines are available for plotting our graph, so let's count them. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines are available. So we want to evenly space the data out among those 9 lines. And to do that, simply take the largest number you need to graph, which is 17, and divide it by 9. So in our case, 17 divided by 9 is 1.9. But intervals of 1.9 are kind of awkward, so we're going to round up to 2 to ensure the largest number stays on our graph. So now we need to label that graph. Start at 2 and work your way all the way to the top, and the highest number should be 18. Now we have to add a label for those numbers. What do they represent? Well, they represent the number of Super Bowl broadcasts. So that's what we'll use for our label on the vertical axis. With both the x and the y axes labeled, we can now create our bars. The data tells us that ABC broadcast 7 Super Bowls, so locate that value on the vertical axis. Next, draw a bar from 0 up to that point above ABC. There you go. Now let's graph the other 3 bars. CBS broadcast 17 Super Bowls. Locate that on the graph, and here's the bar for that. Fox broadcast 6 Super Bowls. Locate the 6 and draw the bar for that. NBC broadcast 16 Super Bowls, so locate 16 on your graph and create the bar for that. To complete our bar graph, we need to add a title. We need to let people know what it is they're reading about. And this is Super Bowls televised by network. There you go. We're all done. Great looking bar graph. Good job. Congratulations, you've learned about bar graphs, how to interpret data in bar graphs, and how to make a bar graph.